And now on the line is Emmet Major, who is a community liaison worker for South Roscommon and East Galway with the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force. Emmet, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Darren.
Okay, Emmet, I interviewed your colleague Neil Wilson from your task force last December, so we don't need to talk a lot about the history of your task force in this interview. Can you start off, Emmet, by telling me a bit about your job or role with the task force?
I can, yeah. I'll give you a tiny bit of background, if you like, because that might help explain that a little bit. There's a number of different task forces around the country, as you'll be well aware, and they cover different geographical areas, typically. So they would have been set up as part of the first national drug strategy, felt the need to have a local response to drug and alcohol problems. Now, particularly, actually, at the time, it was drug problems, because it didn't incorporate alcohol at the time. So there was a health board areas that were with the way that they went. So each of these task forces was assigned to what was at the time an old health board area. So the area we cover is Galway, Mayo and Roscommon, which would have been the old Western Health Board, so the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force. Now, around the country, each of the task forces gets a relatively small budget, right, and they can spend it pretty much as they see fit, right. Each one would have a coordinator and the committee, right, the task force committee, which is made up of the local agencies. So you could say, you know, the health service, the Gardaí, TUSLA, customs, community reps, voluntary reps, people from treatment centres, that kind of thing. Typically 12 to 16 people would make up a task force committee. They decide how the money is spent, right? So the money comes down typically from the Department of Health, and then that's how it works, right? So in our task force area, what they decided to do, and this goes back quite a number of years, was instead of spending the money by giving it out to local services or treatment centres, that kind of thing, we do a little bit of that, but most of the money that the task force has in its operation budget goes to basically spend it on what they call funded workers. So you talked to Neil Wilson there last year, and Neil was an education support worker, so most of his work is in the area of drug and alcohol education and training with different groups, right? They also employ funded community liaison workers, of which I'm one, and then we would have a substance misuse counsellor with the homeless services here in Galway, so that's Simon, Cope, Coombara, and a couple others, right? So my job as community liaison worker is to basically respond to drug and alcohol problems in that patch. So you could say South Roscommon, East Galway, it was kind of split up territorially. So we have three community liaison workers, one who covers Mayo and a bit of North Roscommon. I do the rest of Roscommon, and I do Galway, and then there's another guy, Liam O'Loughlin. He would be covering Galway City and out towards Connemara and out that side. So we cover a patch of roughly the same population of people. So there's 450,000 people in Galway, Mayo and Roscommon in the three counties. And roughly speaking, you could say our patch covers about 150,000 people, each of us, right? So my job is varied, right? So I do a myriad of different things, really. My background is as an addiction counsellor. I don't do a whole lot of one-to-one addiction counselling work these days, but I do some different stuff with groups. I do some training. We do some development work. I'm doing a lot of work in the area of this new project called Planet Youth, which we might talk about in a little while.
Yeah. And
then I do a lot of work with schools and young people in the region as well, to try and more on the prevention side of things, right? So the national drug strategy really always kind of had this idea of four pillars, right? 4 or 5 pillars, which would have been treatment and rehab. So people that kind of at the sticky end of drug and alcohol problems, or kind of more at the addiction or dependency side of things. So people that are struggling trying to get into treatment, or from treatment into rehab. So that was one area. Then there's this whole area of prevention, right? Trying to prevent these problems arising. Then there's this piece around education. Then there's stuff around research. So it's kind of all broken up into these different areas. And I do little bits and pieces in all of these areas, if you like. But I would say I have a particular interest in the areas of kind of rehab, and then I would also have a bit of interest in the area of prevention as well. My background, though, really would be coming from the treatment side of things. I would have worked for quite a number of years in treatment services, and I would have looked after residential service out here in Galway for a while as well.
So do you deal much with people who are actually using drugs like themselves?
On a day-to-day basis, I don't, right? I do run our Smart Recovery out this side. I don't know if you're aware of Smart Recovery. It's kind of like a peer support group for people who have addiction issues. Could be drugs or alcohol, could be gambling or food or sex. But typically in Ireland, most of the time when you're dealing with addiction, it tends to be alcohol. 70% of the time, Then we would have drugs would be the next big one, prescription and street drugs, and then the other one the next kind of big addictive issue really that's presenting is gambling, right? So I work with people that have drug problems, with alcohol problems, not day to day though that much. Mostly it would be, I run a group once a week in town in Galway City, which is the smart recovery stuff. I do bits and pieces from time to time with the prison service here as well, and probation. Right, so I do a version of that smart recovery program called Inside Out, which we've been working with up in Castlereagh Prison, which is the only prison we have in our region. So we're trying to get people in a more, how would you say, kind of a seamless way to try and get them as they're coming out of prison, that we can kind of plug them into attending meetings when they come out, right? Because that's obviously a very difficult, dangerous time for people when they're coming out of prison for the first time, and they might have been in there for a year or two, or longer even sometimes, So they're quite
kind of vulnerable. That'd be the word.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For a variety of reasons. One of the main ones being is kind of around overdose worries. Because people might have, people have been in prison for a while. There are drugs in prisons, but maybe not the same drugs or easy access to drugs. So people are really highly at risk of overdose. So they come out and they take particularly if they're using intravenous drugs like heroin, or using heroin intravenously, and they might overdo it because the dosage, the tolerance levels would have been changed while they're inside. So we try and work a little bit with that as well.
Okay.
And so on,
Okay, and how big is the alcohol and illegal drug misuse problems in South Roscommon, East Galway, Emmet?
Well, we're there, there's no question of that. I wouldn't say they're terribly different from anywhere else in the country. When the Western Region Drug Task Force was set up, right, so it was originally the Western Region Drug Task Force, which was started up around 2006, so you're talking a good while ago now, 10, 13 years nearly. At the time, the national drug strategy was all very much drug focused, right? So the idea that these different task forces were set up to establish and look at local responses, so responses to local drug problems, right? And at the time, there wouldn't have been such a massive problem down here with the likes of heroin. Just take that as an example. Opiates, right? They weren't seen as a massive issue in Galway, right? What our big problem down this side was always alcohol, because it's so available. It's so socially acceptable, that kind of thing. So we went at the very outset. They said, well, actually, we want to put that at the forefront of what we're doing, right? Because that's our big problem drug down here. So that was kind of one of the ones that we had at the outset. Now, since then, right, alcohol has been incorporated into the work of the task forces, right? And now that happened since, right, when they brought out the latest version of the National Drug Strategy. So the 2016 to 25 version of it, right, incorporates alcohol. So we were always a little bit ahead of that one. So in terms of what our problem drugs are down here, right, the ones we tend to focus on, I suppose, a little bit more, is alcohol would be one of the big ones, obviously, right? After that, possibly one of the bigger ones would be benzos, right? So we have there's a whole different suite. We could your Valiums, your Xanax, your Libriums, these kind of drugs, right? Quite freely available on the street, right? So people can buy them. Typically it's €1 a tablet down here. For street benzos or prescription, then people can buy prescription medication on benzos on the streets, a little bit more expensive, or you can buy, or then you have your just prescribed benzo. So we have a lot of issues around that, not discussed that much really, but that would be one of our bigger problem drugs. After that, the biggest one obviously then would be cannabis. And then after that, we're into slightly different stuff. So we have our cocaine, we have our heroin, we have ketamine, and then we're into stuff that's a little bit more, smaller scale, but definitely out there. So your ecstasies and head shop products that are still coming in online, that kind of way, So a little bit of everything, right? But the big ones, right? Cocaine, alcohol,
cannabis.
benzos, cannabis, yeah, with a little bit of heroin. Now there is a lot more heroin in Galway than there used to be, but then there's a lot more heroin everywhere than there used to be. So that would be considered one as well, right?
But the use of heroin in Dublin has reduced hugely, I think. It's grown in other parts of the country, I believe, but in actual, I've done a couple of interviews and and apparently Yeah, during the 90s it was at its peak in Dublin, whereas now it's reduced a lot, isn't it?
Well, that's, I couldn't honestly say. I'm not too aware, because we don't tend to have too much with what happens in Dublin. But I presume I'm delighted to hear it if it has. But I mean, the anecdotal reports you're always hearing about, the amount of, people walking around the city centre. There's quite a visible drug problem in Galway, in Dublin City. And I don't know whether that's true or not. You can see a bit of it, certainly. But down in Galway, right, in Galway City particularly, right, we would have a visible drug problem now where we never had. Even if you went back 5, 6, 8, 10 years now, that wouldn't have been there. We would have had a few people, street drinkers and the like. We would have had a small kind of cohort of homeless people. That seems to be on the increase, and we see a lot more people that would have drug problems on the streets now. So there's definitely more visible heroin issue than there would have been in years gone by, which isn't a good thing, obviously. We'd rather that wasn't the case.
Oh yeah, there is definitely, it's obvious, visible drug problem in Dublin. A lot of the people on the streets of Dublin who are doing heroin, they have a dual diagnosis, and they're doing not just heroin, like they could be doing benzos and other kind of drugs. It's a mix, you know what I mean? But I have been told definitely in interviews that like up until during the 80s and 90s, heroin was a huge problem in working disadvantaged areas in Dublin, whereas now it's reduced hugely in those areas, but it's spread significantly to other places, I know there are several Alcoholics Anonymous or AA groups across the South Roscommon area. I don't know about East Galway and AA meetings. What's the situation as regards to services for people trying to get off other drugs, apart from alcohol?
We're not too, well we have, okay, so typically, right, out in the community, if you like, there isn't a whole pile. You could say, okay, you've mentioned AA there, right, and we have AA, we have NA with groups for people who want to try and get off drugs, and then there's GA for gambling, and those would be very well established, 12-step recovery or AA type recovery. Then we have Smart Recovery in Galway City, right? But we're not too badly served actually out west in terms of the drug problems, right? So we have the HSE West Drugs Service, right, which is an outpatient counselling service. So if you have, let's say, just take an example, any drug problem, could be heroin, could be cannabis, could be cocaine, and you want to see somebody about it, right? We have a service here where you can phone up, you'll get an outpatient appointment pretty quick. You might have to wait a week. That wouldn't be, it'd be talking that kind of time scale. There isn't a big long wait. And there's, across the region, right, we have about 8 or 10 people attached to that service, right? And they specifically deal with adults, so over 18. If you have a drug problem, come and see us, right? And then they can advise and see what you need to do, whether the counselling is going to be sufficient, or whether you need to think about treatment. There'll be options there as well. And then for under 18, if you're under 18 and have an alcohol or drug problem, they'll see you as well. And there's a couple of specialised underage counsellors there, right? So they cover all of the region. So Galway City, and then out in East Galway, there'll be a couple of people who cover that area. And then in Roscommon, there's 2 counsellors in Roscommon, one north, one south. And then there's an underage counsellor who covers Roscommon and Mayo, and one for Galway. So in total, now this is off the top of my head, there's 6 or 7, I think, counsellors covering the region, and 2 under 18 counsellors. So that's a pretty good one, right? That's a pretty good service. Not every region would have a specialist or a dedicated drugs counselling service like that. So we're fortunate there. Where we are falling down a little bit out this side is in the alcohol, right? Because quite these days, if you want to get a statutory or like a HSE provided alcohol service, that isn't available anymore. There was a time you could access a counsellor, if you just had an alcohol issue, right? You could go and see your GP. He'd refer you into the HSE, and you'd see a counsellor. And sometimes it'd be a week or 2 or 3 or 4 maybe, but you'd get to see somebody. Whereas that's gone now. So one of the recommendations going way back now into the Visions for Change, the mental health document, was that that service, the HSE alcohol service, came in under mental health. So they don't see people these days unless you have a mental health issue to go with your drink problem, which is very unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of campaigning and work in the areas to try and get that changed or improved or replaced, or so that if you in Galway or Roscommon, if you have an alcohol problem, at the moment you have to either go to treatment, see a private counsellor, or go to 12-step recovery like AA or Smart Recovery. So there's a big gap in our service out here there, but that's being addressed. Hopefully, there's a lot of it's not confirmed yet, but hopefully by next year there'll be a service plugged in to replace what we lost. Hopefully.
I'd like to come back to talk to you about that maybe again.
Sure.
I know there's a lot of services across a lot of the country in different areas of mental health and addictions.
There is, yeah, gaps.
My parents have a house outside Castlerea in Roscommon, but I go down there occasionally, but I don't actually know a lot of people in the area. For example, I don't really go to pubs down there, you know.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit, if you know much about the alcohol and legal drug misuse problems in that town, Castlerea.
I can't say off the top of my head whether there's anything of note, you know, that I could say Castlerea was any different to any other town. You know, I really couldn't say. You know, Roscommon it's like, you know, it wouldn't be any different to any other rural town. I wouldn't imagine. There'd be a little bit of everything. You know, there's still a very pub kind of culture. Like out in the countryside, it tends to be maybe a little bit more alcohol. But that's not to say there isn't anything else really available if you're looking for it as well. You know, there really and truly that there was a small reputation going back that, you know, Castlerea might have had a slightly larger drug issue because of the prison. But I don't know that that's ever been proven to be the case, you know. It would have the same drug or alcohol problems as any other town of its size in our area, you know, so far as there are people, you know, that are drinking too much, and there are people that are taking too much drugs and need a little bit of help, or whether they're reaching out to get it now is the other matter, you know.
I believe that in Dublin, illegal and some legal drugs not on prescription are widely available, and you can get them delivered to your door from drug dealers. Does that happen as well? I presume it does in your area?
Well, it's all done online now with the drug trade, and not all, right? But I've asked a huge amount of it is, you know. So probably is the answer, you know. Anecdotally, yeah, for sure, you know. If you want to get I was going to say, if anything you want, you'd be able to find it online and pretty fast. You know, it wouldn't take too long. I mean, if you wanted to go and talk to, you know, somebody living down the side that was, you know, using a bit of dope or cannabis or something like that, listen, could you organise and get me some of that? I wouldn't imagine it'd take you more than half an hour, you know. And like you say, a lot of it's done, but, you know, can be delivered or dropped off local, that kind of thing, for sure.
Okay, to talk a bit about the national situation in Ireland, some big changes are planned for alcohol and illegal drugs. The Public Health Alcohol Act is now in law, and there are a couple of big changes in the pipeline as regards to illegal drugs as well, aren't there? There's a debate about like a decriminalisation, and in Dublin and maybe some other cities there could be the injection rooms. Do you know much about that?
I know a whole pile about it, Darren. I mean, yeah, it's a constant debate, you know, insofar as this whole idea that the war on drugs is been lost, you know, or has been lost, kind of thing, or should we be looking at a different way altogether? You know, the jury is out. You know, it's very hard to know. I think it might be a little bit of a ways off yet. And I noticed there recently the Injection Centre, Dublin City Council, obviously they knocked back the planning for that. I don't know if you saw that. It was in the news last week. Yeah, so that's quite a big setback for Merchants Quay. You know, I don't know quite whether they're going to appeal it or how that's going to matter. But I mean, that's a long time being talked about now, and seemed like, you know, somewhat, you know, quite possibly a progressive step. You know, but it's on hold, it seems, for now. You know, so yeah, that debate is still going on backwards and forwards, and you know, I don't honestly know where it's at yet. As to the public health alcohol bill, yeah, that's gone through. It's lost a few of it, bits and pieces that were in it, but yeah, we'll see. We'll get some of the things that we're hoping for there, because you know, all of the international studies would seem to say that the things you need to be looking at are price, marketing, and availability. If you want to be talking about alcohol and reducing harm related to alcohol, you need to focus on those areas, and that's what the bill does to a large degree.
Okay, so you're a big supporter of that act. To talk a bit about the global situation, and you only mentioned it there a second ago about illegal drug misuse, Emmet. Like, I know Canada and some states in the US have legalised cannabis in the last few years. And I talked to Neil Wilson about this last December. Since last December, are there any kind of big reports or anything that have come out in those areas, in those places, about cannabis and whether it's a good idea or not?
I honestly couldn't say, right, because I haven't been looking into it, right. But I would be very surprised if there wasn't. You know, there's a few different websites you could check for that. You know. And even if you looked in the World Health Organization website, there's usually some very good stuff on that. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of different states. You mentioned Canada, and also a number of states then have decriminalized. Well, some have legalized, some have decriminalized, and for medical use. So there's lots of changes there. You know, we'll be slowly, I'd say, inching in that direction in Europe as well, in different parts of Europe. But you know, it could be a good ways off yet, I'd say. But I mean, if you just type into Google and say, research on, legalization of marijuana or cannabis, it'll come up. It'll throw up a load of useful articles, I expect.